Could you tell us a little bit about what things are like in Gaza right now, what day-to-day life is like in Gaza right now?
There's this perpetual fear and anxiety that exists within each person every single day. And you're constantly reminded of what you've lost and what you still could potentially lose. I think so. I've been to, Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Libya, Syria, you name it. And there was something different about Gaza that, my colleagues and I were trying to put our finger on, and colleagues both like in the journalism space and in the humanitarian space. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was until I got there. And that's when I was really hit by it. It's the complete and total, sheer and utter psychological obliteration on a mass scale. You don't see life in the sense of life within a person, that spark of life that exists in, all of our eyes, that energy of life that, we all are supposed to be emitting. It's gone. It's gone. I mean, people's eyes are deadened, their movements are lethargic and mechanical, and you really do get an understanding of how it is that the deep intensity of the relentless daily trauma has forced everybody to have to shove all of their emotions down because they can't risk any of it coming up. Because if it does, I mean, they will literally crack. Everyone's already on the edge of insanity.
Yeah, I want to drill down on that because, as you noted, you've covered war zones since the invasion of Iraq, and you went on to cover Syria, you covered Libya, Afghanistan. I closely followed your coverage of the Syrian civil war. I thought that was really vital. And what you write in your CNN piece is that the suffering you witnessed in Gaza is different from all of those conflicts. Now, the other wars were no picnic. Syria had Assad, he was an abject monster. You also had the rise of ISIS there and in Iraq. What about what's happening in Gaza right now makes it different in terms of its effect on the people there than those other wars?
I mean, yeah, and look, I mean, every war is horrible, and everyone who has suffered a loss in war feels the a same similar level of pain. Like that's not necessarily kind of, the comparison that any of us really talk about. And the horror of having, to leave everything you love and behind. I mean, that also is the emotions that it generates is similar. But it's something about the relentlessness of the daily traumas being inflicted upon the people in Gaza with such frequency that makes the psychological effect really on sort of the very essence of what makes us human different when it comes to Gaza. It's the sheer constancy of it. It goes from, waking up hungry and having your children be hungry to the drones buzzing overhead that really feel as if they're taunting everybody with this refrain of, oh, you think you survived? Just wait. We're watching you. Your turn is coming. To the reality that there is no real, genuine, safe space there, that there's no access to anything that allows a person to feel like what they were before. Clean shower, proper bathroom, the ability to put your child into a bed, to just lean back against something when you're not living in a tent. I mean, everything has been so stripped away and eradicated, and then it's trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And you see all these instances where, if a child starts laughing, it all of a sudden gets cut off because either they've heard an explosion in the distance or the drones are coming, or something else has sort of happened.
One statistic in your piece for CNN that really shocked me, and it's from 2022, so before the current war, and it found that 80% of children in Gaza reported feelings of sadness or depression, which is, I think, fairly staggering. And you said you're certain that those numbers that are 100% now. What do you think that means for the future of these kids, that is the feeling that is so pervasive throughout this region?
One, it basically means that, the health of the Gazan society, in the future as these kids grow up to be adults, is in jeopardy. I was having this horribly morbid thought when I was in Gaza, actually. Um, and it's a bit of an exaggeration, of course, but I had it, and it was that Israel doesn't need to kill any more Gazans because they're basically already dead. Because I felt like I was walking through a sea of people whose souls had been so crushed that they were already dead. And I say that's an exaggeration, because even though that is the way people are feeling right now, that's not to say that that life cannot come back, right? That's not to say that they should, be somehow discarded. But going back to, the issue of mental health in children, if we look at it sort of more broadly speaking, if this sort of trauma does not get addressed, it effectively ends up, calcifying within an individual and will impede them from having a healthy sort of, productive life, and it will impede their ability to interact as they grow and mature into adulthood. And this is where, as much as we talk about the need to physically rebuild Gaza, the need to provide prosthetics and other sort of medical treatment for all of the children who have been injured, we also need to make sure that we don't lose focus on the need for mental health, because mental health still, to this day, always gets sort of relegated as a secondary, nice to deal with, as opposed to need to deal with kind of challenge. And that should not be the case. You cannot build a healthy society moving forward. We cannot talk about giving Gazans a chance to rebuild their life if we don't also give them the chance, the framework, and provide them with the resources they need to start to rebuild their psychology.
I think case in point of what you're saying there is this one child you wrote about, a 4-year-old named Ahmed. And I found his story really hard to read, but I think it illustrates what you're talking about there. So tell us about him and about your meeting with him.
Yeah, so I met Ahmed in a hospital in Egypt, and he was there with his grandfather, and he has half his head is shaved, and he has this like huge zigzaggy Frankenstein-esque scar on it, and his little hairs had just started growing back. He'd had a severe head wound. And Ahmed doesn't talk. Ahmed stopped talking. His grandfather was saying that, he used to talk, he gibberishy, whatever, a 3-4-year-old speaks. But then he stopped, and he stopped because he and his parents and his sister were actually fleeing to a shelter when a bomb landed near them, and they all died. And actually, Ahmed was presumed to have died as well. His grandfather didn't find him until I think it was like 10 days after the strike in a hospital, completely by coincidence. And so no one really knows, what Ahmed saw. No one knows if, he was knocked out right away. Did he hear his parents screaming? What were those 10 days in the hospital like for him? Because he doesn't talk. What you do see, though, is that, this can slowly start to get coaxed back with the right kind of, intense mental health work, because over the course of the weeks, he has started to interact a little bit more. So, he smiles at me when I come in. He gives me a high five. He'll nod and shake his head, but it really goes to show you, because he's not the first child I've met like that. Like, a child who's so traumatized, they don't have words, they don't have vocabulary anymore. And that's something that requires, years and years and years of mental health work. And we have to be ready for that. We absolutely have to be ready for that. I actually also met, and this wasn't in the article, but I met a girl in that same hospital. She's about 15 years old, and she couldn't move. She basically couldn't really move from her chest down. So she was effectively paralyzed, except there was nothing physically wrong with her. And so the doctor's only conclusion is that it is some kind of trauma-related psychological paralysis. And now with physical therapy, she's getting a lot better. Now she can sit up, she can use her arms a lot more, but we're seeing this trauma manifesting itself in many, many different ways right now.